Today on the Relationship Revival Show, I'm joined by Dr. Cletus R. Bulach. Cletus is a retired Ohio school superintendent and associate professor emeritus at the University of West Georgia. He's the author of 2 books, School Climate and Culture, Vis-a-Vis Student Learning, Keys to Collaborative Problem Solving and Responsibility. The second book is Enhancing a High-Performing School Culture and Climate, New Insights for Improving Schools. His website is www.westga.edu/C Bulach, that's C-B-U-L-A-C-H, and his email is cbulach@comcast.net. All materials on his website are free, and today we're going to talk about the very intimate and very heavy subject of school shootings, why they happen, what's the relational issues that kids are facing in school, and his thoughts on how we can change the culture to help prevent these, hopefully, moving forward. You're listening to the Relationship Revival Podcast with John DeBach, also known as Mr. Spirituality. That's me. I'm your host, giving you insights and guidance from over 10 years in the field of this amazing journey we call romance. On this show, I go over everything you need to know about how to get into a relationship, how to get the most out of a relationship, and sometimes even how to gracefully end a relationship without pulling your hair out and going crazy. And occasionally, I'm even joined by new and old friends who are also relationship experts to bring you guidance and wisdom with new perspectives. Thanks for stopping by. Okay. Yes. I'm here with Dr. Cletus Bulach. Thank you so much for being on the show. I think you have such a great perspective on such a really heavy and important matter, being that you've practiced in different ways, but you most importantly, you were also a superintendent in a school. And so there you have kind of that firsthand knowledge of what does and doesn't work, and what kind of, that actual real world experience of how to make things have serious change and transformation in the schooling system. And so your books, and you have 2 of them. Why don't you share the titles? I know we talked about them just before the interview, but let's kind of review the 2 titles again so people know what they are. Can you hold it up for me? Sorry, I made you Sure. Put them on the shelf, and now you're getting them back down. The first one is called let's see.
It's about school climate and learning.
Oh, if you can just move it a little bit that way. So it's School Climate and Culture Vis-a-Vis Student Learning, Keys to Collaborative Problem Solving and Responsibility. Right. So that's the first book. And the second book was called Enhancing a High Performance School Culture and Climate. Talk to me about what was the impetus behind writing these books and how they're related to school shootings.
Oh, well, in the year 2002, I had been into character education and bullying behavior, creating surveys that measure that in schools and doing presentations on it across the country and in Scotland and other countries on my findings. And in the state of West Virginia, the governor at that time decided he wanted to have character education taught in the schools because he felt that the behavior of the kids was a problem. And it was part of a nationwide endeavor at that time. Georgia is when I first got into it, because in 1999, Georgia passed a law requiring character ed be taught in all the schools. And that's how I got into it, because the local school district wanted help. And, well, how do you measure what's going on in the schools?
So let me stop you there for a sec, because I don't remember, because it was after my time, having character education in schools. I also wasn't in Georgia. So what does that look like? What does a curriculum even look like?
Well, it's crazy, because what I found out, I got the contract to evaluate what happened in the state of West Virginia, which is where this material for these books come from. When I went around to every school district in the state and talked to students and kids students and teachers about what they liked about their schools and their character ed program, I got a
Huh.
lot of data, and I saw some great schools, and I saw some godly awful schools. I mean, where things were just a
Yeah.
shame, a pity. Um, and out of all that, I collected that data and I decided, well, I got to write a book that describes how to create a high performing school, because I saw some in West Virginia, and what they were doing was very different from what was happening in low performing schools. And I realized that the biggest problem was the human relations that occurred in the school, just like what would occur in a marriage
Hmm.
or in any business, in any organization where people have to work together.
Before we get into
The
the
human relations.
relationships, let's just define, because I'm not an educator. Let's define what a high performing versus a low performing school is. Is it just test scores?
Oh, well, test scores. Okay, let's talk about a
Uh-huh.
car going down the road. Uh, Gasoline
Right.
is what makes it go, right? And what's the end goal
To go.
on a
Yeah.
car? High performance and
Uh-huh.
good gas mileage. Well, in a school, test scores is the product, good gas mileage. What do you get out of a high performing school? You get good test scores. What do you get out of a high performing car?
Hmm.
Good gas mileage, good speed, good performance.
So that's the reliable
And we
barometer at which you can measure.
that is the barometer. Test scores is the barometer, but it really isn't. It shouldn't be the barometer. What should be measured is what
Got it.
causes that. And they're not measuring that, and it's school
Okay.
culture
So
and
now we can
climate.
jump back into that relations, because I
The,
think that was important to clarify.
yeah, the culture and the climate in the school is created by how people treat each other. When you walk in the door, how do you feel? Do you like working there? How do you get treated? Are you empowered or are you controlled? And all the things that go into the way people are treated, just the way you are in any other situation, whether it's a marriage or at your church or wherever. There is a culture and a climate that develops where when you walk in, do you feel good? Or do you say, oh my, what kind of
Hmm.
place is this? And you have a feeling when you walk in about how things are. And I use an analogy in the book of a uh, haven't seen him
Yeah,
all
that's
at my
okay.
age,
You can
80,
take your time.
80. But oh, when
Uh-huh.
iceberg is the analogy. When you see an iceberg poking its way out of
Hmm.
the ocean, there is a huge piece
Much
of
bigger than
ice
what you
below
see.
it
Right.
that
Hmm.
supports what's above. So when you walk into a school, what you see and what you hear creates a feeling for you. It's like the iceberg, it's what you see, but what's below the surface is what's the culture. It's what people value and believe and how they treat each other. You can't see it, but it's there. And you really can't hear it,
Hmm.
but it's there. But how do you identify that? And so that's the secret to a high performing school. And it's the secret to any healthy organization, going back to probably the kernels of what happens in human relations, and its openness and trust, which was when I started my doctorate in social psychology and
Hmm.
organizational psychology. I was very interested
Yeah.
in trust and what causes it. Why do people trust each other? And I thought, well, openness has to have something to do with that. And it's like a chicken
Hmm.
and egg kind of thing. Would you be open to someone you didn't
Right.
trust? No. Would you trust someone that you weren't open with? No. Well, which comes first? And it all goes back to authenticity. When you see someone, how do you feel about it? You have an impression. Are they authentic? Are they really who they say they are? And you get some feeling of authenticity, you start trusting and you open up to them a little bit. And how that goes, the trust process begins and the openness process begins, and you begin becoming aware of each other. The same thing is true in any marriage or in any
Yeah,
relationship
parent,
with
child, friend,
people.
employer, employee. Yeah,
Yeah,
I could see this
yeah,
being, yeah.
yeah. Um, and as I went through asking these kids and teachers, what do you like about your school? I came to realize that the needs of these people are not being met. The needs of the kids aren't being met, and the needs of the teachers aren't being met. So I began looking at that, and I looked at some of the early philosophers going back to the 18th century. I'm having another senior moment here. I'll come up with it. But the first thing they said was, well, the question is, why do people
Right.
behave the way they do? Which is the issue for shooters. Why do they do that? Why would anybody do that? Why do people behave the way they do? Well, it's because of their needs. What are their needs causes them to behave the way they do? So the philosophers back in the 18th century identified the first need that they identified was one that related to life itself. They wanted to be alive. But related to that was feelings of stress, anxiety, and safety. How did they feel in this environment? Were they scared? So you get to that one and all the way to the end, from one extreme to the other of not feeling very good about it to being feared for your death, for your life.
Yeah.
That's a spectrum. But all of that spectrum is a basic need that people have. Next guy comes along and he says, oh, it's Nietzsche. Nietzsche
Oh,
is
the
the
18th
one
century. Yeah, sure.
that, yeah,
Right.
the agnostic. So the second guy comes along and he says, well, yeah, that's right. But, and I don't have the names of I'm just looking over the literature. They didn't name who came up with this first one. Maslow's hierarchy would put that first need at the bottom, at need number one. Okay, but he didn't come up with that need. He came up way later on dealing with learning. But they pretty much agreed that need, fear for your life and anxiety and stress and so forth, was a major need. The second guy comes along, and I don't have the name for that one either, but there was agreement that happiness is a need. That life with no happiness is no life. You can't be happy all the time, but moments of
crucial
happiness
to existence. Yeah, absolutely.
Is a need. Then Nietzsche comes along, and that's the first person I could document that came up with a need. And surprisingly, this need just blows your mind because it happens every day in our president's Trump. When I see him operating, I'm thinking this need is uppermost in your mind. And when I think of Putin and I think of and on with North Korea and China and what's going on in Iraq and Iran and Venezuela and all over. It's just, he says, well, yeah, people need to not fear for their life and they want to be happy. But the big issue is that's not the issue. The issue is control. He says people want to have some control of what happens in their life. I thought, wow. And I started looking into that. And control takes place through the use of a form of power. Okay? Now, way back when, French and Raven, two brilliant organizational psychologists or whatever they were, came up with the theory that there was a typology of power. And they came up with 5 forms of power. 3 of the forms of power, position power, reward power, and coercion power, were controlling forms of power. Oh, they didn't talk about. I've now got a 9 typology of power. that I don't think anyone it's not out there yet, and I've just not been able to get it out there. But there are
Hmm.
9 forms of power that I've identified that give a person control. And here's where the bully comes in and the shooters come in. Control is a major, major factor in any person's life, in any marriage, in any organization. Who controls what happens? And then the crazy thing is, to be a good leader, you have to give control.
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
you can't hold on to everything as a leader. So that's the ultimate control is the willingness to let it go. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, but then you say to somebody, you have to let people have control.
Right.
Well, I'm the leader. I can't let them have control. I says,
Yeah.
yes, you can. Here's the mantra for a true leader. You give control to people, but you
Hmm.
don't give it up. What do you mean you don't give it up? I says, no, a leader never gives it up. Well, what do you mean? I says, well, you give control using the 5 freeing forms of power. And when that doesn't work, you take it back with the 4 controlling forms of power. Oh.
Oh. That's the answer you always want, right? Oh.
Uh, well, so now where do you want to go with this? Because we've got the 5. You
Yeah.
got 3 of the needs.
Let's
Control
review those 3 real quick. So
is the
there's go through them again. I'm gonna take some notes.
well, there is fear for your safety, your anxiety, your stress, and at the extreme on that one
Yeah.
behavior, it's fear for your
But
life.
let's talk about the power.
Okay.
Because I remember you went through 3 different types of power that are controlling. So what are those?
Okay.
So what are those again?
Okay. You want to go through
Well,
all 9 of
let's
them?
go over a few so
Why
we
don't
can
we?
see how they differentiate. We don't have to go through all 9.
Okay. Well, just for example, what we're
Yeah.
doing right now, information, power. Information is power. You share it with people and they say, wow, I didn't think of that, but that's right. I'm going to do that. So, when you share information, you don't make them do anything. You just give them the information and they
Right.
can do with it what they want. But, if you tell your son or your daughter going out the door at 16 with the car keys, look, curfew's at 10 o'clock. Make
Mhm.
sure you're in at 10 o'clock. Information,
Yeah.
right? What happens if they're not in at 10
I don't know,
o'clock?
Cleet. My kids aren't 16 yet.
Well, if you don't take control back when they come in and say, hey, son, curfew was at 10 o'clock and you didn't do it. What do you think we ought to do about that? What do you mean? Well, you
Right.
didn't follow the
So you have to take
rules.
the car away,
So
right?
I have I have to do something. What do you think we ought to do? So you take control back. Because when you give control and they don't do what they're supposed to do, so you get to on the freeing forms of power, information is probably the
Yeah.
easiest one to use. Now we go back to the 5th one, which
Uh-huh.
is moral power. Putting moral power in place
That seems kind of complicated.
is probably one of the wisest things any
Yeah.
person ever did, but it goes back to what is
Right.
the right thing to do?
And I
What
think
is the right
that's,
thing to
as
do?
a parent, that's what every parent strives for, is giving your kids the moral compass that makes them, or fuels them to make the right decision. Talk to me about how this relates to schools, though. How do you build these kind of relationships between
Okay.
teachers and students, or students amongst each other even?
Well, the big thing is, how do you give control to the kids without
So
giving it
before we
up?
even jump there, are
And
you
it's
saying
easy.
that that shootings are, from your research, a result of a kid feeling a lack of control?
Okay, we go back. We start with the
Uh-huh.
5 basic needs, because when we get hooked on
Right,
control and
right,
go
right.
into the 9 forms of power,
It's a different road.
that's a whole that's another
Yeah.
30 to 50 minutes to get into that one. So control is a major, major factor. When kids have no control over what happens in school, they don't like it. When teachers have no control, when they're controlled by the administration, by the school board, and by the state and the feds, they don't like it. Because control, when you use the freeing forms of power, you give control. When you do that, power is used to motivate. When you use the controlling forms of power, you don't motivate, you control. And when you control, you breed resistance instead of motivation. So what happens in schools is they're told what the rules are. They're told where to sit. They're told when to do this and when to do that. And they have no control over what happens in school. And now when you get to extracurriculars and sports and so forth, they have some control and they love it. The teachers, by and large, don't have much control over what happens to them because there are so many regulations anymore. They must be on page so-and-so at such a certain time. They must be teaching such and such at a certain time, and on and on. When I was a teacher, I could do whatever I wanted. I could teach what I wanted, when I wanted it. And even with German teacher, we used to sing German beer drinking songs. And the kids just loved it. But, they learned a lot of vocabulary during that. And they learned how to pronounce good German words. And they enjoyed it. And I enjoyed it. We had fun together. So control is a big, big factor. But that need was not being met in many of the schools in West Virginia. And all across the United States, that need is not being met. Teachers many times feel like they have no control.
Why do you think there's been such a shift? Because this mass shooting is obviously growing and it's become an epidemic in this country. What happened and when did it happen that this control and the needs of the students and the teachers started to just slip away?
Well, let's go to the fourth need. And we're not going to leave control. But the fourth need is caring. And the literature is replete on the importance of nature versus nurture. Nurture, if babies are held, if they're cared for, how do they develop versus those that are not? Well, all the way through your life, caring is a very important factor. And in any marriage, caring is critical. If you perceive that someone doesn't care about you, or if you woke up one morning and realized that nobody cares about me as a person, that's a horrible, horrible feeling. Many people who do that, suicide is the option. Now, when you add to it the fifth need, purpose, and the purpose-driven life, what was his name? Mahatma Gandhi. There's another guy who's written
Rick
Purpose-Driven Life, and I know. Yeah, there's a lot out there on that. Life with no purpose is no life. Life with no happiness is no life. Life with no control is no life. If nobody cares about you, it's not okay. So what are you going to do if your needs aren't being met? There's the question. What happens in a school when a kid goes to school and he may be being bullied, which is where most of the shooters in some way or other at one time or other were bullied. Me, 5'4", 125 pounds as a high school senior.
Yeah.
You think I wasn't bullied?
Yeah.
I was a scrapper. Yeah, I fought like crazy. It made me tough. But I beat the crap out of some of those big no goods, They eventually learned to leave me alone. But when a person goes to school and they fear because somebody might pick on them, and I went to school many times wondering if that guy was going to come after me again. And if you have no control over what's going on, and you believe nobody cares about you, and the other kids don't, and teachers don't. And I asked the kids when I interviewed in West, why do you go to school? What do you mean? I says, why do you go to school? Well, I have to. You mean there's no other? No, if I didn't have to go,
Yeah.
I wouldn't go. I hate school. And about 50% of the kids would say that they really
Yeah.
don't like school. So they have no purpose in going to school. They have no control, believe nobody cares, and they may be fearing for their life. What are they going to do? So when you get a gun, what do you get when you put your finger
Some
on that
control,
trigger?
some power. Yeah.
Control, control. And I'll show them I'm in control. And they now have a purpose. Um, and along the way, they may be
Sure.
taking a few drugs
Yeah.
for happiness, make them feel good, smoke a few joints, or they may
Right.
join a gang because the gang gives them security. Um, Suicide is always an option. A gun is always an option. Joining a gangs are options. Not going to school are options. I played more hooky than any other kid at the school. I mean, I hated school. I hated it. My 4 worst years of my life
Wow.
were high school. And I ended up with a doctorate
Yeah.
degree, believe it or not. um, um, so we get back to the 5 basic needs. If they are not being met, you must do something. You cannot tolerate that in your life.
So on a
I
big
mean,
organizational system like a school, I love what you're saying. I mean, I think that, yes, could you point to a million other things like gun control or drug use solely or media and influence, but what's at the heart of the issue are the relationships we build in schools and the sense of joy and purpose that people have going to the school. I think that's, so to be bold enough to make that statement is kind of courageous sometimes. So let's talk about what maybe some like, what do you, because you were superintendent, how do you instill that into a school? It's not one-on-one. It's not like therapy or counseling. You have to do it on a big kind of massive scale.
well, the problem is the vision. There is no vision that brings the whole group together. Chapter 5 in my first book describes how you would bring the entire community together. Um, that would take too long to get into. But um, there is a way, but you start by giving the kids control. And it starts very simple. Um, Techniques that are so simple, you think, well, God, everything that I write about and what I say is common sense. There's nothing highfalutin or highly theoretical about what I say or
Mm-hmm.
what I recommend. I'm a
Mm-hmm.
farm boy from Indiana, grew up one of 7 kids. We were piss poor, but we had a great life. And everything I did in all my life, if it isn't common
Yeah.
sense, I don't want to hear it. So common sense would tell you, well, why didn't you ask them what they want you to do? I'm the new principal coming into the school. I go to the teachers first day. I say, hey guys, I'd like to know what you expect of me as your principal. Here's some 3x5 cards. Pass those out for me. And on each card, I want you to write one thing you expect of me as your principal. If you need more cards, just holler and somebody will give them to you. And I would just say, okay, let me know when you've got 3 or 4 cards filled out. So I would just twiddle my thumbs and wait till they
Mm-hmm.
filled out their cards. And I pass them into the center and collect them. And I would get their expectations of me as their principal. Well, why doesn't a teacher do that the first day of school? What do you expect of me as your teacher? You build a relationship. You say, I want to know what you guys expected. I'm listening to you. I'm open to you. The trust process. I want to build the relationship with them. I'm working for you guys. So the theory throughout this whole thing is, and throughout the Bible, by the way, if you want to get into religion, whether you're
Yeah.
Jewish or Catholic or whatever, Christian or whatever, it's
Yeah.
all about service. We are here
Yeah.
to serve others. Well, why don't we do that? There's so much self-serving going on in our country as opposed to servant leadership, which is the theme throughout the book. And you can get on the web and look up servant leadership, and there are servant leadership pods throughout the United States. One's in Indianapolis about servant leadership, and there are a couple of others who espouse servant leadership. But there are many other forms of leadership. Servant leadership is one. Transformational leadership is another. Transactional leadership is another. In transactional leadership, everything is done for what am I going to get? Trump is probably very good at that one. Transformational leadership is all about change, bringing about change, and on with the different types of leadership. Servant leadership is one, and it's not one that is very prevalent today. But when you go back to the schools, as the schools in the United States began falling behind the schools in the rest of the world, the people up top, the feds and so forth, what do we do about these schools? And you begin tightening down the controls. The more you tighten down the controls on the teachers, they tighten down on the kids. And the more you control, the more resistance and lack of performance that you get. So what we have in our schools today is a lack of performance because the kids' needs aren't being met because the needs of the people above are controlled.
So everybody got so hung up on falling behind, and they felt like the answer was more control, more kind of regulation, and that has kind of crippled the ability to develop relationships and kind of it makes perfect sense to me. My favorite teachers growing up are the ones that somehow disregarded some of those kind of silly regulations of structure and were bold enough to say, today we're going to talk about this, and those are the ones that really made an impact on me personally. And I see it I have 4 kids and they're all in school. The teachers that really resonate with them are the ones that care, that they know care, that make them have a sense of autonomy in the classroom. Well, where do you guys want to sit? How do you guys want to perform this task as a group or individual? There's a sense of ownership that the kids take on that's exciting to them. And it's empowering to the teacher too, because you see the teacher sees that he or she is building leadership in the kids, and that's exciting.
Yes, it is. Well, that they asking the kids, what do you expect of me as your teacher is one step. Go one step further. What rules do you want me to enforce in this classroom? Here's 3x5 cards. Write down one rule on each card. So you give each kid 3 cards and you get 25 kids, you get 75 cards back of what they want the rules. Because there's one thing, and you quickly sort them into common piles. And you come up with, you got 5 classes of kids, you got 100 and plus different rules, and you come up with 10 or 12 where they pretty much agree these should be the rules in this school. And there's one rule they never put in, because I've done this when I was a teacher. The rule is put your homework in on time.
No one puts that rule in.
That is never one that there's agreement on. Oh, there'll be some kids that put it in, but it's never one that's got a lot.
What did you find when you did this as a teacher were the most common rules the kids did agree on? Yeah,
the ones they did agree on. No favorites. They didn't want a teacher. Don't have any favorites in the classroom. Okay, that was one of the ones. We don't want you to show favorites to anybody. Okay, that was one of them. Of course, and that was a rule that we put up there, but it was one that they would
Yeah.
enforce, because I was the one who that was
Sure.
an expectation that they had of me that I would not have. That was not a rule. It was the rules for the kids. Um, um, but when the rules went up on the board and somebody violated the rules, I would say, "Hey, somebody's violating rule number 2."
Yeah.
That's all I had to say. Everybody who was violating rule number 2, the other kids would look at the guy who's
Yeah.
violating rule number 2. And what do you think what that guy is going to do?
Right.
Stop immediately. I didn't do a thing.
Well, I think all this
All I,
is so insightful. I don't have the experience. I did teach after school programming for a little bit, math classes, and I got to say it was challenging. Probably one of the reasons I got into couples counseling is because I feel more at home talking one-on-one or two-on-one than I did managing a room of 40, 10-year-old, 12-year-old boys, which was kind of where I got stuck. And I think having this thought process back when I was doing it would have saved me a lot of heartache. And I'm sure it'll save a lot of teachers and even parents, um, heartache kind of thinking about it. I'm going to share your website in the show notes because it is a little bit hard to spell. So it's westga.edu, and then there's a / and then a tilde key, which is right next to the 1 on the keyboard, and it's C Bulach. But I'll put it in the show notes so that everybody could see it. There's a lot of amazing
okay.
free information resources on your site. There's also links to your books. Um, Let me ask you this, and maybe we can kind of close with this. If you could give parents and teachers one piece of advice to take to make their kids' school lives better, one actionable thing they can do today, what would it be?
Well, this is for you and for them. When you're counseling anybody, and parents, you counsel your
Mm-hmm.
kids every day. If things aren't going the way they're supposed to go, I go back to the 5 basic needs and say, what are your needs being met? How do you feel about safety and so forth? Are you okay with that? Are you happy? Do you feel like you have some control? You begin probing on the needs. Do you think like your parent? Do you think like we care about you? Well, tell me what you think about that. And you're talking to your kids, and even in a marriage counseling situation, you focus on the 5 needs. You look at the forces for and against about what's happening in
Mm-hmm.
a situation or what's happening in the home. Um, and the technique I talked about, force field analysis by Kurt Lewin. As a parent, you can go to your kid and say, "Dad does a wonderful job as a parent because," to your kids,
Yeah.
and let them fill it out. He'd do a better job if. Get their feedback. Let them
If
let
and
them critique
because.
you.
Great words.
Um, it's just it's just simple. It's just simple common sense stuff that all you got to do is ask
Yeah.
sometimes for
Providing a
information,
space where that could be
and you
where you can have that dialogue for sure.
yeah, getting feedback about how you're coming across as a husband, as a teacher, as
Yeah.
anybody out there, no matter what your role is in life. How do you come across? Getting feedback is very difficult, and that force field analysis thing is so simple to use because you can say, Cletus Bulach, as the did on the podcast with Mr. Spirituality, did a
Mm-hmm.
great job because he would do a better job if. When I did my presentations on how to create a high performing school, I would say, Cletus Bulach did a great job with this presentation because. Complete that as many times as you want. I do a better job if, and I would get
Right.
back my feedback. Getting feedback is probably one of the most difficult. Honest feedback is the most difficult thing to do but it's the easiest thing to do if you do it in such a way that people feel free to tell you. And that force field analysis is the easiest way to do it.
Dr. Cletus Bulach, thank you so much for your amazing wisdom and sharing your time with everybody. I really appreciate you being on the program, talking about such important topics. And yeah, and I'm gonna leave links to everything in the show notes to kind of let people know where to go find more about you. And again, I just appreciate your time.
Well, can we come back sometime and dig into these
Yeah, I'd like
9
that very
forms of
much. I
power?
think that's a good topic for you to come back, and we'll do all
Would
9.
be
How's that? If we'll block out an hour and we'll do all 9.
you know, yeah. I think that's probably, if we can leave parents with anything, or people out there with anything, is how do you control
Yeah.
people without giving it up? How do you give them control? Most people don't know anything about the 9 forms of power and the fact that there are 5 ways to give
Without
people
releasing
control
it from yourself. Yeah.
without giving it up.
Well, again, thank you. So I think that's great. I'm
then-
gonna have to schedule you for another session, because I think that's definitely worth jumping into in and of itself, just as a topic where we don't get distracted with all the amazing other things that you teach. So thank you. If you're interested in learning how to get the absolute most out of your romantic relationships, then you're in luck, because I have put together a free workshop, or masterclass, if you will, about 3 secrets that people in happy relationships have discovered. You can view the workshop at mrspirituality.com/3 secrets. Again, it's completely free. Just go there and watch it. It'll help you on your journey, give you some wisdom, some things to think about. The website again is mrspirituality.com/3 secrets. That's mrspirituality.com/3, the word secrets. It's all yours. Enjoy.